ULI is a group that has a tremendous amount of crossover with the Bay Area Council, and I think on your board of governors is Michael Covarrubias, who's the vice chair of the Bay Area Council, and he's the one who, either for good or bad, asked me to do this, and I said I can't refuse my vice chair, but it's a good opportunity for us to have a little chat about some pretty important issues. And council, I won't go too deeply into the council, but 70 or so year old organization really has been working on the issues around sustainability and planning the Bay Area region since World War II. It's done some pretty good things. Was the group that back in the 1950s conceived the BART system. So if you're riding on BART, especially if you're having a good ride, I had the good one this morning, Mr. Reynolds, thank you. It was business leaders back at that time who, after World War II, who felt we needed to have a regional transportation system to drive the Bay Area forward, and actually drove that through the California legislature, got it on the ballot, and that's a pretty big deal. I don't think we ever did anything that important since then. I'm trying to come up with something. But back in the 1990s, the council had a person in the position of vice president of sustainable development before anybody knew exactly what that meant. I'm not even sure the person in the job exactly knew what that meant, but we were ahead of our time. And transit-oriented development was a concept that groups like the Bay Area Council and ULI invented back then as a vision for how areas like the Bay Area and Los Angeles and other major regions could move forward. My predecessor in the job was Sonny McPeak, who says she her blood is on the streets out in Contra Costa County at the Contra Costa Center, where this amazing urban development has sprung around what was previously open fields at the Pleasant Hill BART station. So we have a lot of pride in trying to drive that kind of agenda forward. This talk, I was asked to talk about the business of resiliency. Resiliency is a good common buzzword, so congratulations for that. It means a lot of things to a lot of people. My wife's starting to be a clinical psychologist, and I asked her what resiliency meant, and after about 15 minutes I walked out and she was still talking about it. So whatever she thought it meant, and she thought it meant a lot of things, it wasn't about that. So I could talk about the resiliency of business. In business, resiliency is a really important word. In fact, just to reinforce the fact that this is a business talk, I dress like a banker today. So if you're looking up here, white shirt, I'm a banker, not a venture capitalist, even nothing like that, a real banker. Just so you're reminded of who's talking to you, especially if you get mad at what I say. You can be mad at the bankers, who are an important part of the Bay Area Council. But there's a lot of ways you could take this, but I think for our purpose today, we're going to take it in the direction on issues where the Bay Area Council's been involved and where the region is integrally involved in responding to disasters and climate change and some of the key issues that I'm sure you've been talking about and I think are largely the focus of this conference. I want to congratulate ULI on the work that you've been doing and inserting the issues around healthy communities into the conversation around resilience. The council, Bay Area Council, has a health committee where for a couple of years we focused on implementing the Affordable Care Act, but more recently we're thinking about how to make the Bay Area a healthier place, not just to help drive down insurance costs, because that's a big factor, but because that's, it's an important part of the environment and the economy of the Bay Area is to have healthier people. And I think that's very much in concert with the work that you did. So to get on with it, let me put forward some thoughts, and we'll see what you think about them, and I hope we'll have some time for some conversation at the end of this. As you've heard in the last few days, we live in a place that is certainly a target for major natural disasters. Obviously earthquakes, which are a big part of the history of this city and our region, but also floods, which don't get as much attention, which we think are just as much a threat, and we're going to talk about that. Drought, which we're currently living with, and fire danger. Those are some of the natural disasters that we talk about, and other disasters are the kinds we make ourselves, and there's some of those disasters in the Bay Area as well. Man-made disasters, and we'll talk about those too. The fact that we're subject to disasters from natural reasons is exacerbated significantly, I think we all agree, by the affect of climate change. And so with climate change, I don't know so much about earthquakes and how earthquakes affect climate change. Some scientists in the room may have some theories about that, but I don't know much about that science. But certainly when it comes to drought, extreme weather events that would cause floods or fire, or the dryness that could contribute to major fires like we've seen in recent years, you know, those are exacerbated by climate change, there's no question. And it's causing us to have to think and act faster than we might have otherwise done. We should have done it before, but now we really need to do it, or we could get behind this curve. In fact, if we don't act, if we don't take action around these issues, I suspect, and I worry in my day job, that the Bay Area could be a place that doesn't respond well, doesn't recover well, doesn't, in ULI terms, bounce forward well from a major disaster that affects the region. And that's very worrisome because we have a lot of challenges in the Bay Area. We've got housing challenges, which we all talk about. You know, we have congested transportation. We've got trouble attracting the kind of workforce that major companies need. We have poverty, wealth divide, middle class leaving. We have a lot of issues, but the ability to respond and recover from a major disaster is certainly the greatest threat to this place. And that's something that we need to address. So the purpose of my talk is to put forward the notion that we need to come together around this issue. And to do so means we have to bring our beliefs and our values to the table on this, but at the end of the day, we have to all be willing to compromise and work together and collaborate on solutions which are difficult ones. This is not an easy issue, and it's not cheap to be prepared to respond to a major disaster. And we don't want to be, you probably can hear the New York in my voice, we don't want to be the next victim of a Storm Sandy where they just didn't see it coming. Inconceivable that Long Island could get covered in water like that and destroy, so much, or Katrina or other places in the country around the world who've been affected by this. And so, that's what I hope I can convince you of. And if I can, I hope I can ask this group, because there's a lot of leaders among you in this room, whether you're from the Bay Area or some other place, to work with your community, with stakeholders, with your city councils, regional planning agencies, state government, and others to come together around a solution around this issue of preparing for a disaster and doing it quickly, and particularly with those issues related around climate change. If we do that, I think this can be a model region. This can be a coastal region that's ready and has done its homework and invested properly, and when it hits, and unfortunately sooner or later one of these big things are coming, we shouldn't be lulled into a false sense of security. We'll be prepared, and we'll do better, and we will not just bounce back, we'll bounce forward. So I think somewhere over here is a clicker. As I said, I appreciated ULI's work on bouncing forward, but there was an aspect in the report that I'd like to bring up that wasn't mentioned much or maybe at all in the work, and that is around employment and jobs. So as I said, think banker, think business community, but think about the fact that if we have a major disaster and if the jobs go somewhere else as a result of that and they don't come back, we're not going to be very resilient, and we're not going to bounce anywhere but backward. And that's something we can't risk. So we're fortunate to have a very strong economy here in this region, but these companies, and they are just proxies for many others, that have huge facilities at sometimes a little bit below sea level, they'll be hugely impacted in a major flood situation. So when that bay comes over, these companies are going to be moving people quickly to other places. And the question is, how fast can they come back? San Francisco Airport probably won't move people to other places, but hopefully it can operate because it's such a big part of the region's economy. But can they come back from a major, in this case, from a major flood? And so I think we need to think about the jobs and what the implications are of that part of our community recovering quickly. Being the banker, and I actually did work in the banking industry for a number of years, banks are actually regulated on an area called business resumption. So every bank in this country has to prove to an examiner every couple of years that their organization is prepared to recover from a major disaster. And the way they do that is they have redundant operations, they have operations in other places. And so they're prepared to go somewhere else at a moment's notice in order to keep the business going. Banks are not alone in this. So every company has this kind of plan to some degree. The key is for us to be able to keep those jobs in place when the time comes and recover them. So, let me talk about the specific disasters, and I won't cover everything, but I wanted to start with the most current issue, which is drought. We've already lost in the state over 100,000 jobs by current estimates based on the current drought. Now, we've only been in this drought for a couple of years. This isn't a long-term thing. It only takes a couple of years of lack of precipitation to take us from the picture on the left-hand side over to the one on the right-hand side, and it's probably worse than that today. And so if this drought were to continue to something like the Australian Big Dry, which lasted about 10 years, the estimates are that it would cost the state's economy $500 billion. We don't want to see that happen. We need to be better prepared for this in the future, because the fact of the matter is, the state is largely an arid state. It's a desert state. And we haven't put together the infrastructure to deal with the population and demands on the water system. And there's a lot of work to be done in this area. So the next thing I want to talk about is what I think is the core subject that we're here to discuss, which is the potential for flooding. So everybody talks about earthquakes when it comes to the region that we're in, but few folks actually think a whole lot about flooding and the potential for flooding. And the fact is, it's a very, very real threat. Now, how many of you were around in 1862? I see the hands. Okay, so we weren't around in 1862, nor were you around in 1906 anymore. But in 1862, we had an event of biblical proportion in California. We had 40 days and 40 nights of rain, literally, and 16 Mississippi rivers worth of water rained down on California. That's a picture of Sacramento completely underwater. This bankrupted the state at the time, destroyed the agricultural industry, and it can happen again. This is the result of something that some call an atmospheric river, which was depicted on the first slide, the opening slide, or what some call a pineapple express. But it's a series of storms that form over the Pacific Ocean and just keep coming and coming and coming, come out from Hawaii and come over California. And they can hit and they can devastate. And scientists, climatologists estimate that this type of event could happen approximately once every 150 to 200 years. So this one happened a little over 150 years ago, and it can happen again. If something like this were to happen, the bay as we know it would not look like the bay. It would, would well overflow its banks, and we're not prepared for this. The bay was not, our region was not designed to handle a flood like this, and it would have huge, huge impact on us. I didn't make any pictures of fire, but we're all familiar with what fire looks like, and that's another natural disaster. And we've seen a lot of fires in California over a number of years now. We might think, well, as an urban area, we're less susceptible to damage from fire. But in fact, back in 1991, we had a huge, probably the largest urban fire in U.S. history in Oakland Hills. And we have a lot of parts of the Bay Area, places like Mill Valley, where my colleague Rufus lives, and other places where there were heavily, densely wooded areas, and houses and businesses all mixed together. They're very susceptible to a major fire, not to scare you, Rufus, incident. So those are the natural disasters. I want to talk about the so-called man-made disasters, which are, there's a number of different types of this, but I chose this picture. These are houses that are built on the urban edge, out in the hinterland, that are all too common in the Bay Area. Many of us, if you're from another region, you probably don't visit places like this, but believe me, they're out there. They're in the Bay Area and other places, but they're certainly here. The reason these houses are here, we think, is because we're not able to build housing in the places we want it. Organizations like ULI that would argue for dense urban housing, where people live together in healthy communities, as you've described in your report, are certainly what I think we would all advocate. and yet there's so much resistance to building housing in this region. For the last couple of generations, we've fallen way, way, way behind. And instead, the housing, because nobody's in charge in this region, we have 101 cities and 9 counties, and nobody is actually responsible for the production of housing. The Association of Bay Area Governments puts out a housing edict, but it has no teeth in it. We end up with this, path of least resistance, greenfield development, people commuting in many cases 2 to 3 hours to work each way every day to Silicon Valley and San Francisco. And we're going to see more of this unless we do something about it. We have a plan called Plan Bay Area. It calls for 660,000 new homes to be built by 2040 to meet a projected population growth of about 2 million during that period of time. I'm hopeful and skeptical that this can be done without a lot of help at the local level and a lot of push to build housing where it actually needs to be. And the Bay Area Council is committed to working on that, because it's not just enough to plan and conceive what's needed. You actually have to make something happen. How many of you felt the 6.0? How many folks felt that? It's pretty scary. I felt it. I still can kind of feel it. It was a reminder, a temblor, a reminder of what could happen. And I don't really like thinking about it too much. We know we live in an area that is called earthquake country. So when you're listening to the radio, everyone's saying, well, this is earthquake country, and we all accept that. How many of you think that we know that what happens to buildings like this is that they especially older buildings, suffer this kind of damage. How many of you think that the solution to being an earthquake country, just join me, is not to build any more buildings? Stop building, because we're an earthquake country. Stop building. Okay, so not a person in the room. There's a fair amount of people in the room who think that. So it wouldn't make sense to stop building. The solution is to build buildings, the right kind of buildings for the place that you're in. We think the same strategies apply to dealing with drought and dealing with sea level rise. The solution to those issues is not to just retreat and run away from those things, but to actually run at them and invest in them and come up with solutions that are actually consistent with proper urban planning, urban design, and the needs of economic growth, so that we can all keep succeeding in a place, whether that place is here in the Bay Area or in Los Angeles or in other places. If we apply that logic to water, here's an issue related to the drought, where California's been fighting over water at the state level for about 50 years. And you could say not much has been done since the California aqueduct was built, and the former Governor Brown, Pat Brown, actually invested quite a lot after much debate to take California's water system to its present condition. But that was a half-century ago. Here, we have, probably based on the drought, we took an opportunity to get everybody together and bump heads together, and everyone involved in the water issue has a different view of where to focus the funding, and some people truly believe we can get all the water we need by recycling, and others believe we need to build dams, and other groups believe that we need better groundwater management and so forth. The reality is nothing was going to happen unless you can incorporate all of those solutions, and probably some combination of all those solutions was needed. And with the leadership of Governor Brown, we were able to get a deal done where, in bipartisan fashion, with virtually nobody voting against this in either party, we got a $7.5 billion proposition, Prop 1, which will be on the ballot in November, which we hope you'll support. It has stuff in it that's good and you like, and it has stuff in it you may not like, and that's what we need to do on the other issues. We need to come together and realize we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. It's a trite statement, but it's an important reality. If we could do this on this issue, we should be able to address these other difficult issues, because fighting over water with these groups, and we've been at it for a long time at the Bay Area Council, and I personally have, it is very, very tough. Let's move on to the issues around sea level rise, and this is not an easy thing. So on the left, you have a picture down in the South Bay, I think, that of an area that can be reclaimed and probably can, through very natural means, wetlands, with a certain amount of investment, wetlands can be restored there, and they make a great buffer against rising seas. And the Bay Area Council's been working with groups around the region to support that kind of solution, a natural solution in the areas where it doesn't really make sense to build, and a natural solution fits in well. On the other hand, the picture on the right is something you could see if you walk a block down on certain days around the corner when we have a king's tide. You'll see water lapping over the Embarcadero, sometimes with big waves coming over. And it probably doesn't make much sense to be building wetlands in that area. It's not probably going to work. So in that case, we need seawalls, we need levees, we need hardened infrastructure. A natural solution isn't going to work. On the other side of the street are buildings and restaurants and things that need to be protected and are not at fault because sea level is rising. So I want to talk about a few projects and make this real. It's hopefully hit home for folks. So this is a photo of a project called the Redwood City Salt Works. It's a 1,400. How many of you are familiar with this project? So a whole bunch of the Bay Area folks, because it's a pretty controversial issue here. So this is a 1,400-acre site down in Redwood City that's currently used to diked off to be able to evaporate water and produce salt. No longer needed for that purpose, and absolutely has no stormwater overflow protection for the community behind it. A developer came in and said they were willing to invest billions of dollars to restore this, create a housing development, mostly housing, some commercial space, mostly housing, that would fill one of the most phenomenally important needs that we have in Silicon Valley, which is that's the part of the region that has the biggest jobs housing balance. So that's why so many people are commuting from places like Lodi and Tracy to get to their jobs in Silicon Valley, is because the houses are not in Silicon Valley. And every time we try to build in that place, we run up against opposition. So this was what we thought was a real opportunity on the shoreline in a place that's already not in a condition anyone could possibly use it today, to invest a lot of money, and half the space would go back to the community and wetlands and park, and the other half would be houses. And the Bay Area Council never got to the point of actually endorsing this project, and to get into the weeds and the particulars, because it didn't really get that far. It didn't get that far because a group called Save the Bay that has a very clear mission, which is not to have any more fill of the bay, believed that this was indeed a fill site. We would differ with it probably, but that's what they felt. And they passed around a letter that was signed by 92 city councilmen and mayors from around, and boards of supervisors members from around the region, almost all of whom were not in the Redwood City area, and is addressed to the Redwood City Council, and it says, don't do this. We can't have any more fill of the bay. Those days are over. And so with that project seemed to pass us by. Maybe it'll come back in some other form, but what we're left with is a 1,400-acre mess down in Redwood City, which leaves no shoreline protection. And when the time comes that we have one of those storms that we showed on the previous slide, we're going to end up, this is likely to be one of those areas. And right on the other side of this is urban development. This is the same group that opposed the development of the Warriors Arena at Pier 3032. So this is a more recent story. I'm sure just as many people have heard about this. It's a featured San Francisco story, one we've heard before and one we'll hear again. But these piers these are old piers that are literally falling into the bay. So anyone who wants to try to develop this into anything has to, it would have to cost over $100 million to $200 million to fix those piers. The Warriors were willing to build an arena. They were excited to build an arena on this site, spend north of $1 billion to do it, and used private capital to restore the pier, and I would argue it could have been leveraged probably to invest in not just shoreline protection along the piers themselves, but probably for a much broader swath of the Embarcadero in that area. But once again, folks who don't believe in development along the treasured San Francisco waterfront said, this is inappropriate, the scale is too great, we can't have that, and so they weighed in heavily and politically, and at the end of the day, the warriors who feel they need to move forward, they went to another site. So they'll end up investing nothing, zero in shoreline protection. So we could have had hundreds of millions of dollars invested to protect this area privately. We won't have any private money, and the question of what happens to the future of Pier 3032 is much in question, will remain a question. Fortunately, the story gets better because we do have in this region some great projects taking place, and since I showed you two which I think are on the downside, I'll show you two on the upside, but there's some others. One of that are really good examples of what can be done on the shoreline to enhance the overall value of the community and provide shoreline protection, flood protection at the same time. This one's across the bay in Oakland. It's called Brooklyn Basin. It's just south of Jack London Square. It's being built. It's under construction. Mike Gilmetti and Signature Development Company are the developers of this with a major investment from China, building thousands of units of housing, commercial development, a marina, and shoreline protection throughout the project. And as you can see, this protections last well into the late part of this century, and they've designed the project with material setbacks so that in the event of more sea level rise than is expected, they would be able to provide further barriers on this site without impacting the development itself. This is a very exciting new development in Oakland, which has been development resistant over the years. This is going to provide a major opportunity to enhance the economy of Oakland and make Oakland more of a major player in how our regional economy can move forward. The next project is Treasure Island, so we're all familiar with Treasure Island. A lot of work on behalf of the city and county of San Francisco and development groups like Lennar and Stockbridge Capital and Wilson Meany to put this rather complicated deal together. But what you see is an island in which most of the island is reserved as open space. There's intense urban development on the rest of it, just across from San Francisco. Thousands of units of housing will be on this site, and hopefully this project will get started at some point. It still needs some investment, needs some major investment to make it happen, but the planning for it is in place, and it's been designed to make Treasure Island safe from sea level rise for the next century at private expense. So, a major element of this is that we don't have the funds in the public sector to address this problem. And when getting back to the issues around business expects that largely, and I think maybe the public in general, that this is a public responsibility, that the Army Corps of Engineers and the United States would protect us from issues like flood. Historically, that was the case. If you take a look at the appropriation and authorization process in Congress, you won't see much of this. There's no conversation going on in Washington right now about how to protect you from a flood. So it's up to us. This is a regional question of how we're going to do this. And we can't do it without bringing the region together. And projects like this that encourage private development, private enhancement, and not only protect the shoreline, but also add the housing and the sustainable features of the region so we can have those healthy communities and we can be prepared to bounce forward. They're very much in alignment. Now, I or the Bay Area Council wouldn't say that every inch of the shoreline need to be developed in the Bay Area, far from that. But I would say that if we think that there's a solution for this issue, for sea level rise in the Bay Area, for this problem that's coming at us, we cannot escape, that is going to happen without any development, without any growth, and we're just going to run backwards, I think we're kidding ourselves, and I think we're in for some problems in the future. There goes the Pineapple Express, so I'll finish up. We live in a great region. I'm honored to run the Bay Area Council. I've worked with many of you in this room on many, many things. We agree with each other. Sometimes we don't, but we work together. The region is set up in such a way where we've invested a lot in legacy infrastructure. We have water systems that skirt the delta, which make us a little more secure. We have essentially a rocky infrastructure, so if we build the protections, unlike Florida, where the water will just come underneath, we have some natural physical protections. We've got tremendous ingenuity and innovative spirit here. We've got a lot of wealth. We have the potential to invest. And on our good days, we've come together as a place to do some amazing and great things. And I think it's one of the reasons in Elliot's introduction of me and talking about the Bay Area and the Bay Area Council that we've been so incredibly successful. And people want to come here and they want to be part of this life that this place offers. But if we don't address this issue and we don't do it well and we don't do it soon, we could be in for something other than the bounce forward that ULI proposes should be the model systemic value-driven approach that you've laid out and that we want to encourage. So think about the jobs, think about the economy. It's all part of the solution of making this a resilient place. Thank you for having me here. I appreciate it, and I'm happy. There's microphones if you have comments. There's eggs in the back if you want to throw. It's good. And duck and cover, but I appreciate you. And I realize I'm your last speaker, and you can go on and have some fun in San Francisco on the weekend. Thank you. Any brave souls, step on up. I see one. Usually others will follow. Thank you.
Hi, Jim. Bill Mueller from Valley Vision in Sacramento. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
So when my organization works on economic development issues, and when we think about resiliency, one of the challenges we have is that 9 out of every 10 businesses are small. In Sacramento, 91% of the businesses have 20 or fewer employees. We know through some national statistics that 57% of them don't have any sort of emergency response plan at all because they're busy serving their customers. It's not a sort of a focus area for them.
Sure.
So when you think about whether it's earthquake or fire or flood, do you have any suggestions for us about how to reach out to small business and get them engaged in a way that maybe they might not have it on their radar screen?
Yeah, sure. It's probably no harder to involve small business than big business, so don't be misled. We've had a difficult, challenging time getting big business to address this issue, I think largely for the reason that they think that this is the job of the government, because historically it was seen that way. And they have other more immediate things, and I think that's the case with small business too. The thing about small business that's attractive on issues like this is the folks who have these small businesses and are involved are quite local for sure, and they have the community's interests at heart. And in the Bay Area, small business people are vitally involved in everything that goes on in their communities. In some cases, they're the same people who own the homes in the community who are fighting against more housing and so forth. However, I think on this issue, one of the things I think that's a factor is that people don't know about this. And in Sacramento, which is in a floodplain, and you saw the unfortunate picture, I think we have a responsibility to plan Sacramento better and not site large amounts of houses right underneath the levee of the river, of Sacramento River for starters, and secondly, to get people more informed and engaged in an issue which actually affects them. And ultimately, we're going to have to raise some public money for this. We skirted with, we were working with Save the Bay, the same group that opposed a project that we inherently thought had value. We've been working with them for years to try to get on the ballot in the Bay Area with some kind of a measure through the Bay Area Restoration Authority, which they drove to creation with our support, to begin to fund this issue. And we're going to start on the wetlands issue, even though we think that there's a broader approach that needs to be taken, but you need to start somewhere. So we were pretty close to having the Restoration Authority put that on the ballot for 2014, but for a variety of reasons of other things on the ballot and other considerations, it's not easy to have a 9-county ballot measure. we put it off for a couple of years. But in Sacramento, I think it's the same thing. You know, you have to get everybody together, recognize we have a big problem, and everybody has to chip in. And those small business owners are like warriors in those kinds of fights. They can be organized, they can be huge advocates, and if everybody puts up just a modest amount of money in the interest of protecting their homes and businesses, you know, you can raise the kind of money you need to build, you know, the facilities, whether they be natural or human constructed, to do the job. And we need to do that in Sacramento just as much as we need to do it here.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I'm Bill Ashbrook from PNC Real Estate. I applaud yourself or whoever it is that selected the slides, in particular the copy of the letter that went to the City Council for the
Adrian Covert here helped a lot. Stand up for a second. He did a lot of the work on this. He's our water and disaster person.
And I was on the Hurricane Sandy panel that ULI convened, and one of the things that just outlined is one of the tremendous difficulties we have, which is different governmental bodies that have a lack of, first, a common capability, or actually basic capabilities in some cases. You know, there are municipal governments that have no capability and no department to deal with emergency services, and they contract it out, and yet there's elected officials. And the example that you showed was just how elected officials can have to deal with other elected officials coming in and actually playing in their own sandbox. How, just from your perspective, because you have to deal with the people, and as you pointed out, sometimes you're all together on the same side and sometimes you're opposite each other. But when we get to these kind of matters relative to large-scale land use and dealing with kind of climate disaster, right, or certainly climate challenges, water is going to move, fire is going to come, right? And governments need to figure out that their responsibility is to collectively work together. There was a number of panels on insurance here, right? And one town can't get insurance to make sure that the fire in the next town over isn't coming. Can you give any light to the kind of dialogue you've experienced, witnessed, or anything else where you can point to an area where there has been a channel of success that kind of occurred? Because the example you gave of the pier with the warriors, the pier is still there, and the pier is still falling down.
Yeah, sure. Well,
can you give us some hope?
yeah. You know, I think that the other examples I showed are examples of hope, where you've had communities that have worked with private development interests in the common interest. And I think, you know, that sometimes that's called a public-private partnership, and largely I think that's a big part of the solution to this. You know, the other part of it is sort of the leadership question that you raise. So, you know, the Bay Area has this problem of being, you know, we're 101 cities and 9 counties surrounding a bay. And in fact, our actual economy is beyond those 9 counties because people, you know, we have a huge incommute from other parts of the state, San Joaquin County and, you know, Santa Cruz County and places like that, and others where folks are coming in. And there's no control over that. So, you know, I think it's not that there can't be control over it, it's just that there isn't. One of the things the Bay Area Council did was we created, in effect, the BART system. And we created, or were a party to creating the Metropolitan Transportation Commission and the Bay Conservation Development Commission. We participated in that, and the Air District. The reason is because these are issues that, you know, the city-county boundaries are just, you know, they're just in our mind's eye. And so those agencies lack authority. In most cases, you know, they only go so far, but they're models for what could be done on an issue like this. And, you know, the Bay Area Restoration Authority was created by the legislature, but it has 0 funding capacity. It has no money whatsoever. It's all volunteers. And until it has money, it has no money. And so we're trying to think about how to finance that. But it can be done. And, you know, I think that BCDC went down a path a couple of years ago, Bay Conservation Development Commission for the out-of-towners, went down a path where they tried to address this issue, and Will Travis was here somewhere. Will, you here somewhere? Or you walk out on me. We actually opposed what they were doing because the business community felt it wasn't involved in the talks early enough in the game. And so it wasn't so much like what they were trying to do was bad, but a lot of people felt very nervous about it and found out late in the game and so forth. So I think that's an example of where with a little bit of more stakeholder engagement from the beginning, you can get people in the room to scream at each other in the beginning, call each other names, you know, how your solution won't work, and you're a special interest group and all of that. But government has the ability to pull people together. And I think that's the role of government, to do it. And then so I think BCDC is on that path now with some other of the regional organizations working together to begin thinking about, okay, this is very real, how do we do it? And hopefully, and I think business will be more involved from the get-go in this, and I'm hopeful, really hopeful, that we can get to a place in the not too distant future where we get a solution to this. And if we could come together as a region around it and really come together, then I believe we could go to somebody like Senator Feinstein, who has been a leader on this in Washington, or Congresswoman Speer, who's been a leader on issues around the Bay, people, Nancy Pelosi and others, and we could say, look, we're doing our part, but we need the federal government to be more of a partner. If you could do so much to enhance and protect Chesapeake Bay and Puget Sound, you could recognize San Francisco Bay as being just as important as those. And it's really tough out there. I talk to Senator Feinstein all the time. The conversation in Washington, this, is just, there isn't one. But that can change. But first we have to get aligned. So I think there is hope.